next panel is called What Are Prediction Markets and How Are They Getting Away with Operating Like an Online Gambling Platform? A little short summary about this. This session is a must-know primer on the exploding issue of prediction future markets like Kaishi and Polymarket, which are dangerously threatening the autonomy of all states to make decisions on commercialized gambling. Our panelists, to begin, Dr. Noah Goodall, Director of Open Book Research, 501c3, from the state of Virginia, a licensed engineer and transportation researcher with a PhD from the University of Virginia. Noah conducts public interest research on gambling, gun violence, junk science, and autonomous vehicle safety, with recent work scrutinizing state-run online casino platforms like the Virginia Lottery's $2.9 billion annual operation. Next up is Professor Dr. John Kindt.
What an entrance.
Yeah. Welcome. Professor Emeritus of Business and Legal Policy at the University of Illinois. One of America's foremost experts on the economic impacts of commercialized gambling, John recently led the University of Illinois Law Review Symposium, curating 9 essential articles from the nation's top legal scholars and attorneys. Next up is Rob Minnick, a gambling addiction recovery content creator from the state of New Jersey. Isaac Rose-Berman, as we see from yesterday, fellow at the American Institute for Boys and Men, focused on gambling research and policy from the state of New York. Once again, he's a fellow at the American Institute for Boys and Men, focused on gambling research and policy. Isaac is also a professional sports bettor and leading industry commentator whose analysis featured in the Wall Street Journal and beyond illuminates how gambling really works. And our amazing moderator, Russ Coleman, Texas attorney and Stop Predatory Gambling National Board member. All right, thank you.
Super, thank you, Charles. Okay, the emphasis is on primer. So we're going to start with Prediction Markets 101, and for that, Isaac, you're up.
Okay, so yesterday we were talking about online streaming and video games, and I knew no one understood anything that we were talking about. So I'm going to try to keep this relatively simple. I'm going to start off, these are just facts. This is a very emotional issue for a lot of people, myself included, but I'm just going to try to lay this out and let everybody, make your own opinions. So first, what is a prediction market? A prediction market is a platform where people can wager on anything, whether it's an election, whether it's the weather, whether it's who's going to perform at the Super Bowl. Also of note, there are a lot of debates about the terms gambling, wagering, trading. For this specific 5-minute primer, I'm going to use them potentially interchangeably, but that's just, make your own decisions about that. So there are 2 main prediction markets. There is Kaishi and there is Polymarket. Kaishi is currently regulated and operating in the US and accounts for the vast majority of volume. Polymarket is going to be licensed in the US soon and will begin operating. These platforms were popularized during the 2024 election when people were able to wager on whether or not Donald Trump or Kamala Harris would win the election. While they started off in politics and weather and random events, they've quickly transitioned into mainly sports. So Kaishi, the largest prediction market currently in the US, last month 90% of their volume was on sports. This started with March Madness and the ability to bet on who would win the tournament. This then transitioned into the ability to wager on individual games, then the ability to wager on props, such as who is going to score a touchdown, and recently they introduced parlays, which are a type of wager that is very popular in the US now. They released them earlier this week, causing DraftKings and FanDuel stock to each go down by 10%. 34 states, the last time I checked, have sued Kaishi for operating in a legal gambling business. Their response is that they do not offer a gambling business, but rather they are an exchange because they are peer-to-peer, and they are thus regulated by the federal government, by the CFTC, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, which was created in 1974 to regulate commodities futures. Just a couple more things. The main reason that people use prediction markets and the vast majority of their volume now is for two reasons. First is that they are able to offer their product in states without legal sports betting. So for example, right before this panel, I risked $50 to pay out $90 on the Texans. We can talk about whether or not that was gambling, but I did that from my phone, ostensibly legal here in the state of Texas. The other reason that they are so popular and that they have gained widespread appeal is that they have been able to integrate with brokerages, mainly Robinhood, which means there is no separation of wallet. So the same wallet that I use to buy stocks on Robinhood, I can also use to trade these sports-related contracts. Almost done here. So advocates of prediction markets say that these are different than traditional sports betting because they are peer-to-peer and they don't kick out the winners. If you're good, you're not playing against the house. It's a complicated topic, but I would actually refer to the co-founder of FanDuel, who in my opinion put it best when he said, the thing that makes trading on sports on Kalshi and prediction markets similar to sports betting is that fundamentally the user is betting on the outcome of a sporting event. So that's sort of where we are. Earlier this week, 6 senators from across party lines called out these platforms for operating illegal gambling. The CFTC, the commission which is ostensibly meant to regulate them, has been gutted in recent years. There are supposed to be 5 commissioners. There's currently only 1. And as of recently, the person who was slated to lead them was a Kalshi board member. He was his nomination was put down, and the current person who is slated to do it now was quoted saying earlier this year that if people want to lose their shirts, that's on them. We shouldn't stop them. So the future regulation of this looks a little bit grim. But that's just sort of a basic primer. Do with that as you will.
Thank you, Isaac. Before I get into specific questions, do any of the other panelists care to comment on Isaac's overview?
I'll comment a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit about the structure of how it works. It's very different, and it's useful to understand how it works. When you're betting with a sports book, the sports book sets the odds, right? And you can take the over/under on that. This is different. It operates on a market of 1 cent to 99 cents. And so you're either saying yes or you're saying no, and it trades at these prices. You can take a yes position or no position. If you buy a yes, you're buying from someone who had a no, and so it's all trading. When the market resolves, if it's yes, all the yes contracts go to $1 instantly, all the no contracts go to 0 cents. And that's essentially how that works. So what that means is that the price is changing throughout time, and they're actually betting against other people. So in some ways, it's preferable to a sports book in a couple ways. One is that the fees are a little more transparent. The sportsbook not setting the odds. I thought it was impossible to do parlays, but I guess it's not. I didn't realize they could do that now. And it's a bit more transparent with how it's working. Sportsbook uses a lot of weird terminology to try to hide what the true odds are. With this, it's a little clearer to see. Also, because you're not betting against the sportsbook, if you're winning a lot, they're not going to cut you off, which I think is a little more transparent. I've always hated that imbalance there. So that's a benefit there. But I want to talk real quick about Kaishi and Polymarket are the two you hear about all the time, but there's a third that was around since 2014 that no one ever talks about, which is Predict It. And I was on this, I used to use it years ago. And this was kind of how this could be done in a sane, normal way. All right, Predict It was a nonprofit out of a university in New Zealand. And they had markets, and they had to be educational to get approved by CFTC. So they're the things that the public might be interested in. So it's mostly elections, things that happened a year from now. They had very few markets. There wasn't a lot of activity because you're betting on something that's going to happen a year or two from now. And it had all these rules to limit activity. You can only bet $850 on a single market. So you couldn't just go all in with $1 million like you can with these other ones that have no cap. They limited 5,000 people per market, so that eventually it would just get saturated with people. And they didn't have things that the turnaround. They didn't have stuff closing every day. And they wanted to make more revenue, so what they started doing is creeping in other things that were kind of newsworthy, but not really. How many times did Donald Trump tweet in a week? That was a big market they had years ago. And then that was getting all the action, so they started adding other ones. How many times did the POTUS account tweet? How many times did the vice president tweet? And so they had one ending every day. And then CFTC cracked down. They said, that's not of news value. You guys are just trying to gin up volume. And they cut that out. and went back to normal. It's nice. You got all the value, all the interest in like you got all the news articles out of it. So researchers still liked it, but you didn't have all the terrible high volume kind of predatory stuff going on. So that was great. This great model of how it could be. That is now over. They just got approval to be in the same realm as a Kalshi, so they're going to up all their markets now. That just came out like a couple weeks ago. So, but yeah, this can be done in the same normal, less predatory way, I think, and it's sad to see that go.
Just to quickly respond to that. So on the sort of the types of markets that these companies are allowed to offer, as early as last year, Kalshi themselves argued that they were not able to offer sports contracts. They quickly changed. They started offering not only bets on who was going to win the Super Bowl, but then on individual games and parlays. And I really don't want to get too into the weeds here, but to this point about them operating differently than a sports book, that just really isn't true. This idea that you're betting against someone else is not really true. There are what's called market makers. It's just not really a peer-to-peer thing. And so I think, the idea that this is fundamentally different than sports betting is simply not true.
Well, as to the mechanics, I don't disagree. However, what about from a regulatory standpoint? I mean, various state commissions have all sorts of protections, consumer protection, this, that, and the other. What exists as regards Kalshi under CFTC regulation?
Well, it's a great business if you can offer, predicting or gambling and not have to pay state taxes. That's really great. You don't have to follow any licensing rules. You don't have to pay the leagues for their data. You don't have to follow, obviously there are not incredible advertising restrictions for gambling, but it's nice when you don't have to follow them at all. And further to add to this, in their own advertisements, Kalshi says that we are offering legal sports betting in all 50 states. So it is great if you can sort of claim to not be regulated by the states and to avoid that. But I'm talking too much, so I'll let my fellow panelists chime in now.
Yeah, I think there's been a long history of things that are gambling being called something that's not gambling. I think the example that I think of is like fantasy sports. So that's how I ended up getting addicted to gambling, was daily fantasy sports contests, but those were called games of skill. So they were a different age that could start playing. So in New Jersey, those were 18 and up, whereas sports betting is 21 and up, as is casino. I am self-excluded from every sports book and casino I've ever played on. And yesterday, when the topic of prediction markets came up, I opened up my Robinhood app, which I have $0 in because I can't invest in anything that has options near it, or else I will gamble on the options. But I have the app because when Trump versus Harris was going on, I kept looking at the prediction market because I was just shocked at, like, how is this legal? But I am self-excluded from everything, and within 10 seconds, by the time the next sentence is finished, I could have placed a $10,000 wager on the Phillies to beat the Dodgers today. And we're in Texas, and we're not supposed to be able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sure, Destin, please.
You can exit at any time, but to be clear, you can sort of do that at a sports book as well. Sports books allow you to cash out of your bets these days.
Pretty big loss, though, right? Like that typically.
So to this, once again, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but this idea that because it's peer-to-peer, it's much better for the user, it's just really not true. The fees on Kalshi are very high. The NFL is what most people are placing, wagers or predicting on Kalshi. And if a random user goes on Robinhood and they place a wager on the Texans via Kalshi, they are getting worse odds than they are on FanDuel and DraftKings because of the fees. Sports betting works by people placing wagers on both sides of an event and the house taking a cut. Whether or not you are explicitly placing a wager against someone else and someone takes a cut versus you both independently place it versus the house and they take a cut, it doesn't really make a difference. And once again, fundamentally, you are wagering on the outcome of a sporting event.
Just to clarify, so I hear you if I can summarize, it's a distinction without a difference insofar as mechanically how the bet is placed. Fair enough? Okay. John Kindt, please.
I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. I'm going to tell you what happened after Brian Quintenz's nomination failed before the U.S. Senate to be head of the CFTC. So I want my colleagues here to go first. And one thing I wanted to say, we're not going to win this in the courts. Andy Schlafly did a great pro bono amicus brief in the case that we've discussed up here with the other 34 states that are against this. Thanks for doing that. I'm looking at our friends from the Eagle Forum. They were in Washington, D.C. They had maybe 2/3 or 50% of the numbers of people that we have here at this particular conference. They were extremely impactful, along with other groups, coordinating together to get that nomination stopped. You all have more power than you think you have, and in discussions, all of the issues are important. They're all very important, but we need to get them out into the public. We need to get them before the press. How are we going to do that? My colleagues and I have been working on this for 35 years and more. Well, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to ask for a new National Gambling Impact Study Commission. And we've got the oomph right now, we've got the momentum right now to push for this. On the Senate side, they're amenable to this if we get the right senators to introduce the bill. They'll do it on the House side. We've got the attention of the White House, and more attention than you may know. And so we just need boots on the ground to push for a new National Gambling Impact Study Commission. And all of these issues will get out there into the press. This is how we stopped them for almost 10 years back in the 1990s, was through this commission. Let the government do the commission and have committee hearings on every one of these issues that we've discussed here today. That's the way to get it done. And how do you get the attention of your senators and your members of Congress? Well, first of all, kids, kids, kids. Tie your issue to protecting kids. That's what we were discussing in just the previous panel discussion. This is your lead-in. Whatever it is, it's going to affect future generations. It's going to affect kids. So please hit that. And the other thing that gets their attention, half of the members of Congress and in the legislatures at least are attorneys. Hit them with the Illinois Law Review. You got 14 blue ribbon academics, 9 law review articles. This will get you an extra couple of minutes discussing whatever your issue is to push for the new National Gambling Impact Study Commission.
Thank you, John. This may not be a fair question, but because we only have, I guess, one lawyer on our panel. But obviously, you all have done some reading about the various court cases, and just for the benefit of the audience, in 2 federal courts, Kaishi has prevailed. That is, what they are doing is said to be legal under the auspices of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. There, however, is one federal district court that is held the other way. It's very clear this issue is moving really, really quickly. I mean, before I got up here to speak about this, I mean, just in the last 48 hours, there have been all sorts of increasing developments. But that is all prelude to this question. And you may not want to answer it, but based on what you've read, is what Kaishi doing legal or illegal?
I don't think it's legal. And,
okay, thank you.
They're doing events contracts, but they're winning every case because they're forum shopping.
True.
Although they're winning in Nevada and in New Jersey, which you'd think they'd lose in with the judiciary there, but they're winning all the cases.
Well, just to be clear, they did lose in Maryland, and that case is now on appeal for the Fourth Circuit. But that's a very, very recent development.
But it'll go to the Supreme Court. Let's not argue the legalese on this.
That's fine.
Let's argue how to beat them. And the way to beat them is what I just shared.
Well, I would like, I mean, just for the perspective of a professional sports bettor and from others, I would just appreciate your perspective. Again, based on what you've read, do you think it's legal or illegal?
I think it's illegal, but nobody is enforcing the illegality of this and in many other areas that were discussed here over the last couple of days.
Well, that's because things are pending. But eventually, as you're right, it'll go to the Supreme Court and we'll have a final decision, and then it will be enforced. So, Noah, please.
Look,
Noah, please.
I taught law courses for 40 years. The system is broken. It is not working.
Thank you. Noah, please.
So, yeah, I can't talk to the legality of it, but the absurdity of it, I certainly can. The CFTC's Commodities Futures Trading Commission. That's commodities, things like corn, oil. The reason we have these is if you're a farmer, and you're selling corn a year from now, and you need to buy, your seeds right now or whatever you need to plant the corn, you have this distance, you have this gap there, so you can actually, the futures market lets you kind of reduce your risk. You can sell like ahead of time for like maybe a reduced price, but now you have the money you need to do the planting. That's the point of this. There's a thing at the end of it. There's a physical object. Sports betting is such a stretch to say that's a commodity. Somehow this is regulated under that system. It's very weird to me, and I just think that it's such an absurd argument. So I can't say legality, but it's ludicrous.
Thank you. Rob, please.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but I took the LSAT 3 times. Actually. I got the same score every time. Don't worry. Well, I think it's definitely wrong, and it's circumventing things that are in constitutions of states to keep out. But it comes back to like, it's legal. It shouldn't be, but it's legal until someone says otherwise.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Isaac.
Once again, not a lawyer. I strongly believe it is illegal. I don't know that much, but I do know that in Texas, sports betting is supposed to be illegal, and yet once again, I just risked $50 to pay out $90 on the Texans game. Kind of sounds like sports betting to me.
Well, what would happen if the state attorney general or even federal jurisdiction listened to this and decided to make a PR issue out of it? Out of your bet right here.
I completely agree. I think one thing is that there is not much awareness of this issue, and not only that these products and these platforms are legal, but what I really think is the worst part about this is the integration and partnership with brokerages. The idea that someone can log into a brokerage account where they hold their retirement savings and be promoted bets on the Texans is simply insane. Whatever you think about gambling companies and their marketing, you have to make a conscious decision, or often, not so conscious, but you have to actively decide to deposit money from your bank account, from your Venmo, whatever, into DraftKings and FanDuel. They are not automatically linked. The idea that you can have these products in an account where people hold their retirement savings is simply deplorable.
And that's exactly what needs to be in front of a congressional commission and in congressional hearings. Every point you've made, every point Rob and Noah making, that this is the mechanism to do it. It's the only way we're going to get out of the hotel and into the public mindset.
So I think just one to the point earlier, people were asking, what can journalists write? If I were a journalist in Texas, I would write an article, sports betting is legal in Texas now, right? That's what the companies are saying, and that has been done not democratically, and I think that is wrong. I think the people of Texas and the politicians in Texas deserve to make that decision for themselves. It shouldn't be thrust upon them.
On the idea of retirement savings and it being a connected account, if you were to be offered these contracts within the confines of a 401k, could you not pitch that as tax-free gambling?
So as of right now, to be clear, you're not able to use your retirement savings on Robinhood on these, but it's on the same platform, and so you can't technically use your 401k for it right now, but that is the logical next step.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Dr. Gooding.
Let me take another argument at this, because there's a lot of, this is hurting individuals and people. This is also a national security issue, I think. I strongly believe that. And its example was the last election, right? The markets, there's 3 markets kind of covering it. They were kind of matching prices. All of a sudden, Polymarket, which is the one that lets, so not open to the U.S., but you can get around it, but it uses crypto. That one started going crazy, and it was all Trump money coming in. And it was, you could see from the wallets, you knew it was kind of one person. It was some whale just pumping millions of dollars into this thing on Trump, yes. And no one knew what was going on. And the other markets responded because the arbitrageurs could, sell no's and buy yeses on the other one. So the markets were all matching it. It was generating all these news stories, like what's going on, what's going on. Turned out it was like a random French guy who was just happened to be wealthy, commissioned his own research and thought it was a yes. But that could have been a foreign government just pumping, making this number look really huge. This creates all kinds of issues. all the other markets are going to match. It's generating tons of free press. You have foreign involvement in your elections now. That's just like one example. There's all kinds of things. You could have markets for like weird, like terrorist event type things, and someone could exploit that and profit from it. There's so, I think that I haven't even thought of ways you could exploit this as a foreign actor. Granted, that's, it's in a way that's almost untraceable with the use of crypto. So I think that's something that hasn't really been investigated yet.
Thank you.
Did
I
hear
do
you
want to say
that?
that was the first major court case for Kaishi, was regarding their ability to have bets on elections. And once they won that, that opened the door, and then it's Katie bar the door, anything and everything. And they've quickly moved on to sports
And to
betting.
be clear, in that case where they were arguing about whether or not they should be allowed to offer bets on the election, their own lawyers said, we would never offer contracts on sports because clearly that is illegal, because the CFTC does not allow regulated exchanges to offer contracts on gaming. And until recently, everybody agreed that sports was gaming, but now they say otherwise.
Yeah. And to the point of like influencing elections being a national security risk, I used to like, when an election would happen, I would watch like the big board, right? The guy would hit the button, it would change the color of the state, and the vote count would change. I didn't watch that. I watched it on Robinhood as the price fluctuations would swing, and I was like, oh, I guess Trump's president because he's 90 or whatever it's like 90 cents. Oh, he must have won.
I think you all have finally come around to where we've been for a good while, which is this is a national security issue. It affects the economy. It affects our financial systems, not just in the United States, although we lead the world. It affects everything around the world because they copy much of what we do.
I tend to agree. One way or another, this is going to lead to congressional hearings, especially if Kaishi prevails, because there's just too much at risk and it's spreading too quickly. I have one question, and it's a little bit of a loaded question, but it's for Isaac. What would be the mathematical expectancy, and I'm speaking here in probabilistic terms, of a low-cost S&P 500 ETF fund? Would that be positive or negative? And looking back over history as your data set.
It's a really great question. The answer is positive, in that if you put $1 into the S&P over time, obviously it can go up and down. It is expected to go up, and I think there are a lot of definitions of gambling. There are legal definitions of gambling. One thing that I strongly believe that differentiates gambling from not gambling is whether or not the activity is strictly zero-sum. And what I mean by that is when you buy stock in a company, the company can get bigger, you can win. When we're talking about prediction markets or gambling, or anything else, it's strictly zero-sum, meaning let's say I forget, anybody know who the Texans are playing this week? I think it's the Ravens. If I take the Texans and Rob takes the Ravens...
You bet on it and you don't know who they're playing?
Not at all, no, nothing. If I take the Texans and Rob takes the Ravens and Kaishi takes a fee, it's not possible for us both to win, right? This is a strictly zero-sum activity, and that's why it's different than traditional investing, where your money can go up over time. That's not to say that it's, impossible for one individual to win in these markets, like my panelist was talking about, but the reality is they can only win because other people are losing more. And that is what differentiates, in my opinion, gambling from investing, whether or not the activity is strictly zero-sum or negative-sum when you account for the fact that Kaishi and Robinhood are both profiting off of user losses.
Okay, you see where I was going with that, and you did a very fine job, because yesterday when we were talking about the interplay between this and the stock market, the word you used was blurry. So I was looking for valid basis of distinction, and I think you've hit on one very nicely.
We had but we don't just want one congressional hearing on this particular topic that dies. Dick Durbin had a congressional hearing on sports gambling last December, and nothing happened. How do we get more hearings, continual press, go on the offense? And that's with a new National Gambling Impact Study Commission.
Well, and as Les pointed out, that was a lame duck session in the Senate. But I think how you do it is you get a panel of these guys up there. That's how you do it.
Well, yeah.
That's how you do it. Do we have time? Is it time for questions?
You good with your list? Anything else you want to ask before we open?
Oh man, I could go on forever. I think questions, please.
So we're going to open some questions. I just want to start one, because I think one, you kind of touched on it, but I don't think it was crystal clear, because I know I'm asked by journalists to explain it, and I don't have a good answer how to explain it. And so, Isaac, you may be the one to answer this. Tell us how these companies make money. Like, so when you say the fees, like, how does it all work? So, you place that $50 bet, how does it work? And if you can kind of explain it in layman's terms. You also use a term like money maker. I think that's a term, or market mover. Explain, like, kind of for layman, like, how we'd explain that to, if you can, if it's, go ahead.
So, and I'll explain sort of how it works compared to a traditional sports betting company. At a traditional sports betting company, they take the opposite of your trade, so of your bet. So if I bet on the Texans, they are betting on the Ravens. And because the odds are generally sort of fundamentally skewed against the user, they're getting a profitable wager. On an exchange like Kalshi, the way it works is they're usually not taking the other side of your bet, although they have their own trading arm, which also does that, which they maintain as a completely separate entity. Yeah. The way they make their money... Can you repeat that? Say that again. Yes, so Kalshi is an exchange, which means they facilitate trades between different people. There is another company called Kalshi Trading, which is an active market participant on that platform, taking the opposite side of participants. They maintain that there is a strict division between the two. That is a little bit up for debate. But the point is, to Les's question on how these companies make money, they make money by taking a fee from every wager. So if I place a $50 bet on Kalshi, maybe I can win or lose no matter what. Kalshi makes, roughly 5%, it depends on the type of market that they're offering, and they say that they don't rely on user losses, which is technically true because they're usually not taking the other side of a trade, but because these are zero-sum, users must lose and they profit. So once again, to your point before, what did you say? It's a difference without a...
Distinction without a difference.
Distinction without a difference.
But so what's the fee? Like, just so on a $50 wager, what's the fee on that?
It depends on the type of market. If you're placing, these sports contracts, it's usually a few percent, 3 to 5%, which means for every $100 that someone risks on these markets, they're expected to lose $3 to $5.
Okay. And there's some ticky-tacky fees too. Like if you want to take your money out, I think there's like a $2 fee.
Okay.
Something. And point on the sort of the trading arm, just so that there's somebody always available to help take the other side of your bet in the sense that it's matched. These market makers basically provide liquidity to the market. So that's the same thing, for example, that the function of a market maker takes in a stock exchange.
And that's why, to the point about why it's effectively a sports book and not really peer-to-peer, is that Kalshi effectively pays companies to offer wagers on both sides so that when you want to bet, there's always someone on the other side.
Right.
Because it would be annoying if I wanted to go place a bet, but there is no one on the other side. And the point is that these companies, these market makers, which provide bets on both sides of an outcome, operate effectively identically to a sports book, because that is what a sports book does. They offer bets on both sides, and they collect their fees.
So in some way, it's like a perverted version of like a rake in an online poker site or a daily fantasy sports game.
Exactly.
So then making a cut of the money wagered, matching you up, and in some instances, it's like the market movers, market makers. Like, so it's very interesting. It's kind of an online poker type matchup. Okay, well, there's matchup. Okay, let's go out. Let's go to Mr. Kohler of Texas.
Hey, thank you guys. Wonderful conversation. The sports books, real quick, you bet. Those odds are set on. They want bets on both sides. They want them basically to be equal, and then the sports book takes that trim off the top. So the kolache and that. This is very, in my experience, this is no different from what we saw 10 years ago in the state when the commercialization of daily fantasy sports swooped in. In the state of Texas, it was on the radio. This is legal. This is legal. Oh, by the way, there's a federal law that proves it's legal. Preemption, nanny boo-boo. Can't do anything about it. It's a game of skill. How we've seen that play out is no, it's not a game of skill. Some states, they took legislative action. In our state, they tried to argue that it was a game of skill. Didn't work. So in my view, when I say this is couchy, this whole movement, I believe in 4 or 5 months that you'll see it'll go the way of the dodo bird, not unlike what we saw, the skill argument with daily fantasy sports. And the elephant in the room is ERA and how it turns it on its head across this state. When I say eager, I'm talking about the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And you can look at, you didn't mention the tribes in California and the legislative action. That's where, in my opinion, you will see the tires hit the pavement. So thank you all very much. Enjoyed this conversation this morning.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't disagree about the National Commission, but my question is, how would that not be dominated by the industry in the same way that all messaging is dominated by the industry? Wouldn't they pour millions and millions and millions of dollars and bring their own experts, and how would they not dominate that, all those committee hearings?
Right. 30 years ago, the commission was passed, and exactly what you mentioned happened. It was a zoo, but it was out in the public, and the public was debating it. And the PR was going both ways, and everybody was talking about it over and over and over again. And the industry was on the defense the entire time on practically every issue. The commission savaged the lotteries. They savaged the tribal gambling. I can get into all kinds of stories on this, but the point is, go on the offense. And the National Gambling Impact Study Commission puts us on the offense, puts the public on the offense, protects the public, gets it in front of the public. As in the case of the last panel, you're gonna have topics to talk about for 5, 10 years if we have a new National Gambling Impact Study Commission. And that'll generate more congressional hearings on various topics that have been discussed here. It'll go on and on. We need to go on offense. And the time is now because...
John, I'm just going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to cut you off there. I'm going to go to the next question.
I'd also like to talk about congressional hearings, if I may. I'm elated to hear you say that. We need to drive the awareness and the conversation about this issue. You mentioned in your remarks that we've never had the ear of the White House more than we do now. I'm curious your take on how the president's son has not only invested and serves as an advisor to Kaishi, but also now to Polymarket, which, sir, as you had noted, has previously been banned from participating in the U.S. until now being able to authorize sports markets. How do you remedy the two, that the president, the White House, and his son not only stands behind that, but invests in these type of products? How do we get congressional hearings to get action forward?
All I can say about the current administration is that they have been put on the hot seat on exactly what you talked about. And they're getting the message, which has sensitized them to now is the time we can move in Congress for the new National Gambling Impact Study Commission. I don't want to get much more into it, but they have been deeply sensitized by exactly what you just said.
I just briefly wanted to say one of my concerns with the prediction markets is, like, you know, I think the sports gambling and gambling in general, you know, skews male because, you know, men are more risk-taking, but then with sports betting, like, men are, you know, disproportionately sports fans are represented by men, not by a huge margin, but by some degree. But I think with, like, prediction markets, it's like you can bet on, like, not to engage too much in gender stereotype, but you can bet on, like, who's going to win the Real Housewives, or, like, what, you know, is the Taylor Swift album going to, like, mention Blake Lively in this song? Like, you can, like, the most esoteric cultural, like I feel like people bet on stuff because they want to, like, demonstrate, you know, expertise and, you know, show their friends that it's like, oh, I'm smart, I'm good at something. And it's like, because sports betting is, like, only appealing to sports fans who have that expertise, it's like, I feel like this opens up every sort of niche interest group can now become betting addicts.
Let me answer that. If you just go on YouTube, you'll find an ad by Kaishi, which they're advertising, only 30 seconds long. And it has people betting on the price of eggs, betting on when the aliens will land on Earth, all types of bizarre bets. And so if you look at that ad, you'll see what you're talking about.
Anyone else want to take his question? Or are you guys good?
Yeah,
I just want you real quick, I had to put you on the spot, Michael. Remember it was a couple of months ago, there was something like somebody had a relationship with Twitter. Twitter merged with somebody.
Polymarket had
Yeah, could you just explain that to everybody, the significance? You explain it better than anyone I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, it was all theoretical, but when Polymarket announced, I think it was Polymarket announced a partner with X, and my sort of theoretical fear in that moment is that, like, you know, when communities are like watching, not less so now, but like in the heyday of Twitter, like there was like The Bachelor Twitter, there was like Survivor Twitter, all these little communities were like live watching TV shows and live tweeting all this stuff, and they were incredibly, like, the rabid fan bases were most active on Twitter/X, and it's like, I can just imagine how a partnership between these prediction markets and the social media platforms can just basically, like, you know, capitalize on people's like ego and expertise at that moment and basically be like, put your money where your mouth is. Like, you think this is what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes in this finale? Why don't you bet on it?
My one of my biggest fears was like on Apple TV when they cover like a Phillies game or something like that, they'll have probability marks in the bottom right corner, and it'll say like the chance of this being a strikeout. And I think I just saw something. It might have been through Meta, where they had one-click betting on, oh no, it was Amazon, I'm sorry. Amazon Prime was bringing gambling to their NFL streams, where you can bet on your TV, and I think it's the same idea. It's like, if it's the media merging with the gambling company, or in this case, the exchange, you know, where's the stopping point of what's going to become a bet?
But that's what Michael just described, like, that's not theoretical, Mike. That's exactly why Polymarket's in that business. Like, I mean, I've been in this, like, there's no question that's what the intent is. So I just think he's the first one to lay it out. Like, that's a huge deal. And I'm sure, like, what's Reddit and all those things, like, I'm sure they're trying to get into all those communities. Like, that's a huge deal.
And you're leaving out artificial intelligence, which is going to be backing up all of this very quickly, very soon, and has started already.
We live in an increasingly gamblified world. Tech companies make money by their users spending more time on their apps and them feeding you ads. Gambling is a logical extension of that. Gambling companies make more money, as we all know, when their users lose more. And online gambling, their goal is to get you to lose as much money as possible, and teaming up with these companies to integrate them into daily life, whether it's via ESPN and being able to place one-click bets while watching the football game, or Polymarket and X integrating, you know, live bachelor's odds. Their goal is to get you to stay on the apps and bet as much money as possible so they can make as much money as possible.
And that's one fact that hasn't been mentioned that is actually critical to these prediction markets, that we probably should have said at the upfront. You can be 18 years old to bet on these apps. I don't know if we talked about that. So you don't have to be 21. If you're a high school senior who's 18 years old, he can go on these apps in any state that doesn't even have legalized sports gambling and be wagering on these unlimited options. So.
You don't have to really be 18 either. I don't think they verify.
So you're agreeing, say that again, just nice and loud. Say it again.
Yeah, I don't think you really have to be 18 years old for Kaishi. I mean, they may ask you, but there's no real verification.
I will say I do think they do verify that the users are 18, at least on
regardless,
Kalshi.
the fact that a high school senior can jump on
the
these is
unregulated
amazing.
ones, you don't have to. But yeah.
Let me add something to the lady who asked about what was going on at the White House. If a bill gets introduced in the Senate and/or the House or both, that'll get the White House's attention, and vice versa. It all operates in a circle.
Yeah, two very short questions. The first one is if Kalshi is integrated into brokerages, could not the SEC or FINRA get involved because of that?
Yes, there was a panel, I believe it was last week, between the SEC and the CFTC about sort of whether or not the jurisdiction, who it falls to. It's an ongoing debate right now.
Show up in weird ways, because like insider trading is prohibited by the SEC, but for some reason, if it's on a futures market, they're like, what are you gonna do? Like they're kind of open, like, we're not gonna enforce that. And you see it all the time. Like the Taylor Swift engagement announcement, there was a ton of activity like a few minutes before the post went live. You know,
the challenge is just that the securities laws and the laws that deal with this just don't really contemplate the current situation we're in. For example, the mainframe United States securities law is the Securities Act of 1933.
And then also for the gambling commission that you're asking for, if no one can agree whether or not Kaishi and Polymarket actually qualifies as gambling, would they or would they not be necessarily included in that commission?
First of all, who cares? You've got the issue out there, and people are debating the issue and asking the very same question that you just asked. only they're doing it in front of national TV. And all the secular TV will be there, all the faith-based organizations will be there. They were
Oh, you had a
30
question?
years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This gets it out into the public. And let me add one quick thing to that, in line with what Russ was alluding to, and that is that we all have the state attorney generals, the National Association of Attorney Generals. And if you bring an issue like this in front of that organization, we've got letters here from 49 state attorney generals against internet gambling, reprinted their letters to Congress. So if you bring this to your state attorney general, whatever the issue is that has a legal component to it, get them to take it.
We're going to wind. We have two
National
last
Association.
questions, and then we're going to have a break. Kathy Gilroy.
What about money laundering? I haven't heard anything really about money laundering yet. Are there any, anti-money laundering laws that could apply to this?
Great question. You may not have any. That's like, I know this is new to all of us. Like people may be, it would seem like ripe for money laundering. But any thoughts on that? Sorry.
Well, we have the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, but it's, and it had whoever asked the question about DFS, during that congressional hearing, they put in an exception in for DFS, and I remember, I was at that hearing, and said that this is not going to work. They're going to drive a truck through this. Oh, that was Rob who mentioned it.
But the question on money laundering is that's one, like, I didn't even think about it. Like we have some experts that we work with that know money laundering inside out in this country, and that's a question I'll ask them. But I don't think anyone here, like, it's so new. I don't think we have an answer to that. I mean, I don't think we do anyway. So last.
I think both the state regulatory regimes have anti-money laundering
True, but
procedures,
the extent that
and
it's
so does
happening
the
on these
CFT.
platforms,
But I
yeah.
couldn't cite you chapter and verse, and I couldn't tell you if one is more strict than the other.
But my point, but the extent that we have any idea the extent of money laundering that's happening on these platforms, is that I don't think we have any idea on that right now.
Yeah.
So
Fair
this is the
enough.
last question for this session.
Is there any way for states to prohibit the citizens within the state? And I ask that because last legislative session, Louisiana passed a law prohibiting gambling on elections. But I'm thinking that that's not really worth the paper it's written on, since there's no regulation of Kalshi. So that's...
It is not currently, while these cases are working their way through the courts.
Yeah,
but there will be a decision at some point. But presently, the argument that Kalshi makes is pursuant to the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. Federal law governs, and as long as these are federally regulated, it doesn't matter what a state says. It doesn't matter if it's a state statute or the state constitution. But of course, let me be clear, and this was alluded to earlier, and maybe this is a good way to wrap this up. The position of this organization is that what Kalshi is doing is illegal, and we are on record of that, including, and again, this was mentioned earlier, but a big hat tip to Andy Shafley for authoring an amicus brief that takes that position before the Federal Circuit Court, which is the court that's just below the United States Supreme Court. And that is our position, that what Kalshi is doing is illegal. If we prevail, Kalshi may have to change its business model, but it will certainly not be, for example, in California and in Texas, which is where it is now. And just to a couple of words regarding the strength of that amicus brief, it was only a few days later when 34 state attorney generals filed an amicus brief that took the exact same position that we did, which is what Kalshi is doing is illegal. And so again, thanks to Andy.
We're going to stop there, John.
Just one second. That's an excellent example, Kathleen, of something you can take to your Attorney General of your state and see if they'll take it to the National Association of Attorney Generals.
Would you please join me in thanking Noah, Rob, and Isaac, and John? Thank you.
Great job. We're going to take a break for 15 minutes and resume in exactly 10:55. All right?